His love was a foolish fantasy, dear. This land belongs to real family. I stood there on the cold marble, watching my own daughter walk away without looking back. But they didn't know the simple corkscrew my husband left me wasn't for opening wine. They were about to learn what his legacy was truly worth. The cold steel of the corkscrew was the only real thing in the room. My husband's corkscrew. Matilda's voice was a low hum, circling the quiet grief that hung in the air like dust. She gestured vaguely at the sprawling vineyard outside the window. This place, it's a lot for one person to handle, especially now. I watched her trace a line on Sam's favorite oak table, claiming it, erasing him, leaving a smear. I didn't say a word. I just listened, letting her empty threats fill the space he used to occupy with laughter. I thought of the promises we made under these very rafters, the life we had planned to grow old in. She didn't care. Family can be the cruelest word. She leaned in, her smile thin and full of pity. Don't be naive, Audrey. I knew then. This wasn't a conversation. It was a declaration of war. She led me down the stone steps. Each one was a descent back into a world I thought I had lost forever. The air grew cool, filled with the familiar scent of damp earth, aging oak, and Sam's unwavering ambition. This cellar wasn't a room to him. It was a cathedral. Rows upon rows of bottles lay sleeping in their racks, each one a memory, a season, a promise we had shared. He'd built this place with his own 2 hands, the calluses on his palms a testament to a love that was tangible, something you could hold, something you could taste. Matilda's expensive perfume cut through the sacred air, an invasion. She ran a manicured finger across a dusty bottle of his first successful vintage, leaving a clean streak in its wake. She didn't pick it up. She didn't admire it. She merely assessed it. All of this, she began, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Such a frivolous waste of his potential. That was the trigger. The moment the grief in my chest began to crystallize into something harder, something cold. I didn't look at her face. I watched her hands. They were smooth, adorned with heavy gold rings that seemed alien amongst the rustic wood and stone. They were hands that only knew how to take. I remembered Sam's hands in this very spot, stained purple from the harvest, gesturing with a wild, beautiful energy as he explained the soul of the soil. He saw life. She saw inventory. Some people see value. Others only see a price tag. I remained silent, a statue carved from ice. Have you ever been so angry that you became perfectly still? She continued her tour of disdain, tapping a large oak barrel with a sharp click of her ring. He was always a dreamer, my Sam. So sentimental, never had a head for real business. Her tone was coated in a syrupy, false affection that made my stomach turn. She paused, looking at a section of vintages from 3 years ago. He could have been huge. Truly. I set up a meeting for him with a major distributor, a lucrative contract that would have secured this entire vineyard's future. She sighed, a theatrical breath of disappointment. But he refused. Walked away from a fortune because he didn't approve of their business ethics. She laughed a short, brittle laugh. He threw it all away. All on some foolish principle. Matilda adjusted her silk scarf, confident she had made her point, confident she was painting a picture of an unstable, emotional artist who couldn't handle the real world, a man whose legacy needed a firmer, more practical hand to guide it. Her hand. But I wasn't listening to her story. I was listening to the details. She mentioned a distributor's name I'd never heard before. She mentioned a contract I knew nothing about. And then she dropped the seed of her undoing. It was a complete waste of my time. I remember the date exactly because it was the day before my birthday, October 14th, 2022. A date, a contract, a detail meant to prove his weakness, a detail that felt wrong. It was a single loose thread on her perfectly tailored lie, and I knew with a sudden chilling certainty that if I pulled on it, her entire world would unravel. She turned to leave, her victory assured in her mind. Just think about what's best for the family, Audrey. For the real family. The heavy cellar door clicked shut, leaving me in the silence. But it was no longer a silence of grief. It was the silence of the hunt. The silence of the hunt followed me up the stone steps, coiling in my gut like a cold serpent. I felt a new kind of clarity, a sharp-edged purpose. I would find that contract. I would unravel that date. I would protect what was mine. And then I saw her, my daughter, Chloe. She was standing in the grand entryway, her back to the door, her shoulders slumped. And next to her, with a proprietary hand on her arm, was Matilda. The serpent in my gut tightened. Matilda's sons, Daniel and Evan, stood by the fireplace like cheap statues, their expressions a blank mixture of boredom and entitlement. They were vultures, waiting for the feast to be served. My daughter was the main course. "Chloe, honey," I started, my voice softer than I felt. "Can we talk?" "Alone?" Matilda's grip on Chloe's arm tightened. "Your mother is very upset right now, darling," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "I think it's best we're all here for her." She wasn't talking to Chloe. She was warning me. Chloe wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at a point on the polished oak floor, a floor she and Sam had once slid across in their socks, laughing. "Grandma said you were hiding things, Mom." "About Dad's finances, about the vineyard." Her voice was small, wounded. Each word was a perfectly crafted dart, dipped in Matilda's poison and aimed directly at my heart. Betrayal has your own child's eyes. I took a step forward, my hands open, pleading. "That's not true. Everything your father did, he did for us. For this family, I tried to catch her gaze, to find the daughter I knew behind the wall of lies Matilda had built. I wanted to shake her, to scream, to make her remember who we were, but I just stood there. He was in trouble, Mom." "Why didn't you tell me?" Chloe's voice cracked, tears finally spilling over. It was the opening Matilda had been waiting for. "She didn't want you to worry," Matilda cooed, pulling Chloe into a hug that looked more like an act of possession. "Your mother is strong, but she's sentimental. She doesn't always see the practical side of things, the debts." The word hung in the air. Debts. I had handled all of our finances. There were no debts. I reached for her. She flinched. She left. She pulled away from my life and walked towards them, towards Matilda, who opened the grand front door with a triumphant flourish. My daughter crossed the threshold without a single look back. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut with a soft, final finality. The sound echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of the house. I was utterly, completely alone. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a hollow, white noise of pain. It was over. I had lost. I had lost him. I had lost his dream. And now, I had lost my daughter. But through the static in my head, Chloe's last words began to replay, a desperate, angry shout as she was leaving. What about the $50,000 debt from that contract he signed? Grandma showed me the paperwork from October 14th. He was going to lose everything and you hid it. The white noise receded. The pain was still there, a physical ache in my chest. But underneath it, something else sparked. A number that didn't exist, and a date that did. Matilda had overplayed her hand. She hadn't just built a lie. She had given me a map to its foundation. That date, October 14th. It was a splinter in my mind, a detail that didn't belong in Matilda's smooth, rehearsed story. I left the hollow silence of the great hall and descended the stone steps once more. The hunt had a trail now. I didn't go to the racks of wine this time. I went to Sam's desk in the corner, a small, organized island in the vast, quiet cellar. He kept meticulous records of everything: harvest yields, bottling dates, soil acidity. If there was a contract, a debt, anything at all related to that date, it would be here. I spent what felt like hours. I searched. I cross-referenced. I read. The files were perfect. The ledgers were balanced. There was no $50,000 debt. There was no disastrous contract. There was nothing for October 14th, 2022. Nothing at all. Frustration began to curdle the cold resolve in my gut. Was I wrong? Was I chasing a ghost, a phantom detail created by my own grief-addled mind? I leaned back, my hand resting on the cool stone wall behind the desk. It was a wall Sam had built himself. I remembered him telling me he'd reinforced it, that it was the heart of the cellar, the one place that would stand for a century. My fingers traced the mortar lines, the rough texture of the stone. And then I felt it. A single stone, barely perceptible, was set differently from the others. It wasn't a flaw. It was a seam. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed. It gave way with a soft grinding sound, revealing not stone, but a hidden keypad. My mind raced. What was the code? It had to be something only I would know, a date, a memory, our anniversary. I typed in the numbers, 0-6-1-8. A deep, satisfying click echoed in the cellar. A section of the stone wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. I stepped through, held my breath, waited. At the end of the passage was a small, climate-controlled room. This wasn't part of Sam's rustic cathedral of wine. This was a command center, a war room. Charts of the vineyard's soil composition lined one wall, financial projections on another. And in the center, on a simple steel desk, sat a single tablet plugged in, fully charged, waiting. The dead can still speak if you listen. My hands trembled as I picked it up and pressed the power button. The screen glowed to life, showing a single folder on the desktop. It was labeled with one word, a UDREY. I opened it. Hundreds of video files dated over the last 2 years. I clicked the most recent one, and then he was there, my Sam. Thinner, paler than I remembered, but his eyes held the same fire. He looked directly at me. He smiled a sad, weary smile. "Hello, my love." His voice filled the tiny room, a ghost made of light and sound. "If you are watching this, it means I'm gone, and it means they have come for you." The grief I had suppressed rose up, a tidal wave in my throat, but I held it back. I listened. He told me everything. The diagnosis he'd received 2 years ago, the terminal heart condition he'd hidden, not to deceive me, but to steal a few more normal days with me and Chloe, unburdened by the shadow of death. He wanted to live, not to spend his last days dying in front of us. For months, I had been drowning in the sorrow of what was taken from me, never once imagining that he had spent his last days building me a lifeboat. Not a lifeboat, a battleship. He continued, his voice hardening. He explained Matilda's decades of quiet embezzlement. He told me about the so-called contract from October 14th. It wasn't a deal he had foolishly refused. It was a fraudulent document Matilda had created to try and siphon a massive sum from the company, using his name. He had discovered it. He had confronted her. And that was when she began her campaign to paint him as unstable. He had recorded their conversations. He had copied the documents. He had compiled every piece of her deceit. It was all here, in this room, in this tablet. The grief was still there, a hot ache behind my eyes. But now it had a purpose. It had an edge. It had a target. He had started this war to protect us. Now it was my turn to finish it. My war would not begin with a cannon blast. It would begin with a whisper. My first move wasn't to attack Matilda. It was to reclaim my daughter. I found Chloe at her small apartment downtown, a place filled with books and dreams that felt a world away from the cold marble of the vineyard. She opened the door, her eyes wary, her posture defensive. She was ready for a fight. I gave her none. "I'm not here to argue, honey," I said, my voice even and calm. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to listen to your father." One last time, I held out the tablet. Nothing more. The choice was hers. For a long moment, she just stood there, caught between her grandmother's poisonous whispers and her father's memory. I saw the war inside her. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she took it. We sat on her worn-out sofa, a space between us that felt like a canyon. I didn't stay to watch. This moment was for them, and them alone. I found a specific file I had bookmarked, one simply titled "For My Starlight," his nickname for her. I pressed play and walked to the small kitchen, giving her the illusion of privacy. Silence stretched from the living room, then a soft, choked sob. It was followed by a longer silence. I heard the video end. I waited. The sound that came next was the sound of a heart breaking and healing all at once, a deep, sorrowful wail that shook her entire body. She watched. She cried. She understood. When I walked back in, she was curled into a ball, the tablet clutched to her chest like a life raft. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving. "Mom," she whispered through her tears. "Oh my God, Mom. I'm so sorry." I knelt in front of her. I wrapped my arms around my daughter. My queen was back on the board. The next morning, the tone in the house shifted. The air was no longer thick with grief, but with a cold, electric purpose. Chloe sat beside me at the great oak table, Sam's tablet between us. Her eyes, once clouded with doubt, were now as sharp and clear as my own. We were a team. "She won't stop," Chloe said, her voice low. "She'll never stop." "I know," I replied, pulling up a file on my laptop. "That's what we're counting on." My strategy was simple. A cornered predator doesn't run. It lunges. I just had to give her something to lunge at. Together, Chloe and I drafted a formal letter. It was addressed to Matilda and her sons, with their lawyer CC'd. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly devastating in its intent. It informed them of my plan to submit Sam's full body of work, including the complete financial and operational history of Solstice Vineyard, to the prestigious European Vintners Guild for a posthumous legacy award. It was an honor Matilda had been desperately courting for her own family brand for years. I was about to claim it in Sam's name, with Sam's real story. I was taking control of the narrative. I drafted the letter. I waited. She took the bait. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. The response didn't take long. Less than 24 hours. It wasn't a phone call. It was an email from her lawyer. The subject line was a single arrogant word: final. Attached was a cease and desist letter, thick with legal threats and warnings. It demanded I immediately halt my defamatory application to the Guild. It accused me of attempting to tarnish the Mitchell family name, and then I saw it. To support their claim that Sam was financially incompetent and that the vineyard was a failing enterprise saved only by Matilda's intervention, they had attached a single exhibit, a professionally notarized copy of the fraudulent contract, the one from October 14th, the one detailing a $50,000 debt that never existed. They had taken their lie, their whispered insinuation, and forged it into a legal document. They had sent it to me through official channels. They had just committed a fresh, provable crime in writing. It was an act of pure, arrogant desperation, and it was the last piece of the puzzle, the final nail for their coffin. Matilda thought she was cornering me. She never realized she was walking straight into the cage I had built for her. The night of the Solstice Gala was exactly as Matilda had designed it, a breathtaking spectacle of power and influence. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of expensive suits and silk dresses. The air was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. This was her stage, her coronation. She stood at a small podium, a gracious queen addressing her court, the esteemed members of the European Vintners Guild hanging on her every word. She spoke of legacy, of family, of tradition. Each word was a polished lie, and the room drank them in like vintage wine. Chloe stood beside me near the back, her hand gripping mine, her knuckles white. I gave her a slight, reassuring squeeze. The trap was set. The queen was on the board. It was time for the checkmate. When her speech finished, the room erupted in polite, reverent applause. Before the murmuring could begin again, I picked up a crystal glass and gently tapped it with my fingernail. Ting! The sound was small, almost insignificant, but it cut through the applause like a shard of glass. The room fell silent. Every head turned towards me. I didn't look at Matilda. I looked at her partners, at the investors, at the gray-haired president of the Vintners Guild. They were the jury. Matilda speaks of legacy, I began, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily across the silent room, and she is absolutely right. Legacy is everything. It is the story we leave behind. I saw a flicker of annoyance in Matilda's eyes, a gnat at her party. She tried to smile graciously. Audrey, thank you, but perhaps this isn't the time. Oh, I think it is the perfect time, I said, taking a step forward, because I am here tonight to talk about my husband's true legacy. I mentioned my application to the guild. I saw her jaw tighten. You once told me, Matilda, that Sam was a sentimental dreamer who foolishly walked away from a lucrative contract, a deal that would have saved this vineyard from financial ruin. The president of the guild shifted in his seat, intrigued. You also told my daughter, I continued, my gaze still fixed on the jury, that this same contract left my husband with a $50,000 debt, a secret I was supposedly hiding. The murmuring started now, low and curious. Matilda's face was a mask of polite confusion, but I saw the panic beginning to bloom in her eyes. Truth has a way of aging well. The funny thing about my husband, I said, is that he was a meticulous record keeper. I placed a thin folder on the edge of a nearby table. This is his financial statement from that period, audited, not a single dollar of debt to be found. Strange, isn't it? I let the word hang in the air. Matilda opened her mouth to speak, to protest, to dismiss me as a grieving, hysterical widow, but I was already moving to the next piece. But what's even stranger is this. I held up the document her lawyer had emailed me, the notarized, fraudulent contract she had created. This is a document your own legal team sent me 2 days ago, insisting that same $50,000 debt is real. So the question is, which story is true? The flawless company ledgers, or this very convenient piece of paper? Her mask was cracking. The jury was leaning forward. Some legacies are built, others are stolen. But why speculate? I said softly, reaching into my pocket. When we can simply ask the man himself? I pulled out my phone. I pressed play, and my husband's voice, clear, strong, and full of weary truth, filled the magnificent room. It was a recording of his last confrontation with Matilda, his voice calm, hers sharp and panicked as he questioned her about the very contract she now held as her shield. The numbers don't add up, Matilda. Where did the money go? Don't you dare question my business, you ungrateful boy. The recording ended. I looked up. Matilda was frozen, her face ashen. The jury was staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and disgust. Her empire crumbled, not with a bang, but with the quiet, collective gasp of a room that suddenly understood everything. There were lawyers, there were settlements, there were quiet, humiliating exits from boardrooms. Matilda and her sons vanished from the world of wine, their names becoming a cautionary tale whispered at galas like the one where their empire had turned to dust. I didn't watch them fall. I was too busy learning how to build. The vineyard was mine, the wealth, the land, the power. It was all in my hands, and for a terrifying moment standing alone in the vast, silent cellar, I understood the temptation that had consumed Matilda, the temptation to hoard, to possess, to build walls around a legacy and call it a kingdom. I could have become another queen on a cold, lonely throne, but I had listened to my husband's voice. I had remembered his hands, stained with soil, not with greed. His legacy was never meant to be a fortress. It was meant to be a garden. So I opened the gates. Now, the silence of Solstice Vineyard is gone. It's been replaced by a new sound. It's the sound of laughter echoing between the rows of vines, the excited chatter of young voices arguing about soil pH and fermentation techniques. It's the sound of the future. This is the Solstice Foundation, my true inheritance. It's a place for the dreamers, the passionate, the ones with more talent than money, the young Sams of the world who just need a patch of sun to grow in. I walked the rows this afternoon, the late sun warming my face. A young woman named Elena, our first scholarship recipient, ran up to me, her hands covered in dirt, her eyes shining with an idea about a rare grape varietal. She spoke with that same wild, beautiful energy I had loved so dearly in Sam. In that moment, I saw him, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a continuation. Grief can carve you hollow, leaving more space for life to rush in. Chloe found me near the old oak tree at the top of the hill, a bottle of our new vintage and 2 glasses in her hands. She works alongside me now, her sharp business mind a perfect balance to my horticultural heart. The wound between us had healed into a scar that was stronger than the skin had been before. She would have sold this land to developers, you know, Chloe said quietly, looking out over the valley. I know, I replied. She saw an asset. We see a community. She smiled, pouring the wine. It shimmered in the golden light, the color of a sunset, the color of hope. Later, as the first students of the foundation gathered for an evening meal, I called Elena over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old silver corkscrew, Sam's corkscrew. It wasn't a key to a secret room anymore. It wasn't a weapon. It was a story. I pressed it into her hand. Every new vintage needs a beginning, I told her. This was his. Now it's yours. Her eyes widened, full of a gratitude so profound it needed no words. She simply nodded, understood. As the sun dipped below the rolling hills, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep purple, I stood on that same hill, watching the warm lights of the main house flicker on. Down below, Elena raised her glass in a silent toast to me, a gesture of thanks, a promise of what's to come. I saw my husband's dream, not in the grapes on the vine, but in the hands that would now tend to them. I finally understood what he had been building all along. A true legacy isn't owned, it's grown. Thank you so much for letting me share this piece of my life with you today. Family is so complex, and if you have a story of your own about its challenges and triumphs, our comment section is always a warm place to share. We would be truly honored to have you subscribe and become a part of our community.